welcome to our studio. We are preparing for today's live show. Okay, now let's see what Liu Xin is doing. Hi, Liu Xin.
Hello.
Good morning. A morning coffee for you.
Thank you. That's very sweet.
I heard today's topic is about Hong Kong. I remember you made a video about the Hong Kong protests in 2019. So I want to ask you, what impressed you the most when you interviewed in Hong Kong?
Well, a lot of things I would say, but the situation in Hong Kong is really complex. It's a mixture, I would say, of the complexity of the situation in China, plus the unique features of the situation in Hong Kong, and plus also the kind of difficulty or mistrust between the capitalist world and the socialist camp in today's world. So it's really the most complex point of a complex world. And it's interesting because I was just watching this panel of different TV stations in our office, and you could see how many channels were carrying a live press conference that's going on. For instance, this is CGTN, the Chinese channel, news channel, Chinese international channel. This was Channel News Asia. Right now they have disruption of signal, but I believe that they were carrying the same press conference of the Chinese State Council to explain the electoral laws in Hong Kong. But if you look at CNN, if you look at the other international news channels, they're business as usual. They don't carry the whole thing in full, which is understandable. I mean, in a way, it takes up a lot of time. But on the other hand, it says if you don't really go into the situation in Hong Kong, if you don't really look at the details, the nuances yourself, you're not going to understand the situation. And then, some journalists will use a very simplistic way to explain the situation for you with the possibility of misleading the audiences. So that's the kind of a complex and difficult world we're living in. So I'll try in my segment today to explain the changes in a simple way. It's not going to be easy, but let's try. Okay?
Okay, I think you have a lot more to say. So are you ready?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, it's your time.
Thank you.
Let's start it.
Thank you. Hello and welcome to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin. In this sector, I'll dissect stories that are making headlines around the world and talk to my guests to compensate for the missing pieces of the puzzle. So join me in real time by sending me your comments or questions via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube or Weibo. If you're watching this on the CGTN application, email me at thepointwithalex@cgtn.com. Let me know what you think. We air the Headline Buster segment on Fridays at 11 a.m. Beijing time, so do get in touch and I just might read out your comments. This week, we're going to look at how media are covering the changes to Hong Kong's electoral system. Are reports giving reader the whole story, or are they proclaiming the death of democracy in the city without just cause? What is the real story? First of all, what are we talking about? On Thursday, March the 11th, China's top legislature, the MPC, passed a decision to change the electoral system of Hong Kong. Essentially, the size, composition and function of Hong Kong's electoral committee will be adjusted. Now, the Electoral Committee has been the council of elders, let's say, made up of people from different walks of life in Hong Kong to nominate and vote for the Chief Executive, or CE. On the other hand, the legislators or LegCo members were either directly elected or selected through different functional constituencies, in other words, representatives of specific walks of life. But now, from now on, the election committee will not only be charged with electing the CE, but also the nomination of LegCo members and vote for some of them. The size of the LegCo will be bigger, so will the size of the election committee. Now, specifically, the changes include members of the election committee increased from 1,200 to 1,500. Instead of representatives from 4 different sectors, it will now cover 5 to give patriotic figures more representation. The election committee will also nominate candidates for LegCo, which is a new function, as I said. Now, district councillors will be no longer eligible as election committee members. District councillors, for those who do not know the situation, are representatives directly elected on grassroots levels to serve local communities. They were never designed as political roles, but rather service-oriented. But in 2019, the district council elections were turned into a political race by oppositions to win more leverage in Hong Kong's power structure, hence the necessity to put district councillors' role back to its original design. That's why they have been taken off the election committee. Changes concerning the LegCo include members increased from 70 to 90 seats. They will now have to be nominated by the election committee, which was not the case before. On top of the existing ways of selection, some LegCo members will be selected by the election committee. And a candidate qualification review committee shall be established. Now, the committee shall be responsible for reviewing and confirming the qualifications of candidates for the election committee members, the chief executive, and the LegCo members to ensure that the qualifications of candidates are in conformity with the law. According to the decision passed by China's top legislature on Thursday, most of the democratic features in Hong Kong's electoral process remain unchanged. They include the CE will continue to be elected by the election committee by one person, one vote. Some of the LegCo members will still be selected through the existing methods, meaning direct elections and selection through the so-called the functional constituencies. And no change is made to the main body or the text of the basic law, especially the part about universal suffrage being the ultimate aim of CE and LegCo member elections, so on and so forth. But why were these changes needed? Now, over the past few years, especially after the violent protest in 2019, it became clear that certain anti-China destabilizing forces and radical localists were threatening the region's stability and unity and security, of course. There were increased calls for Hong Kong independence. Now, the electoral platforms of the LegCo and district councils were used to push forward their agenda. If the existing loopholes in the electoral system were not plugged, Hong Kong may fall into the hands of those anti-China disruptors serving as proxies of hostile forces against China. One country may be threatened. On the other hand, 2 systems also need to be upheld. That's why China's top legislature had left the main body of the basic law untouched, only changing the specific annexes concerning the selection of the CE and legislators. Now, what do you see when you read overseas media reports? As I could imagine, that Beijing is completely overhauling Hong Kong's electoral system, that this is the death of democracy and the end of one country, 2 systems. But how have they come to such conclusions? Let's take a look at a few examples. My first impression is that when describing the proposed changes, many media like to use the word overhaul, demanding loyalty, as you can see, patriots only, greatly backwards, overhaul, overhaul, overhaul. These are the lyrics you will hear in the chorus. Now, is Beijing really dismantling the system and reshaping it in totally different ways as the word overhaul would suggest. As I've said, the size, composition and function of the election committee will be adjusted, so will the nomination and selection of legislative members, but by and large, the structure remains. The CE will still be elected by the election committee, only by a larger and more representative one. The legislative members will be selected through 3 methods instead of the existing 2. The establishment of a candidate qualification review committee sounds new, but the process was always there. This time is only institutionalized and reinforced and expanded to legislative members. It is common practice around the world anyway. The legislative members will have to be nominated. This is something which was not required in the past, but this alone should not be considered a fundamental change. As we have seen in the past, some legislative members refused to pledge allegiance to the Chinese nation. They perform filibuster to oppose for the sake of opposing. Such actions have proven the low quality of the candidates selected through the existing system. A way has to be found to address that. Now, Beijing has specifically said different opinions are to be tolerated, but there are bottom lines which are expected of any local government in any country, such as you must uphold the constitutional order of that country. In the case of Hong Kong, it's the national constitution and the basic law. Such a person will continue to be able to stand for public office in the city in the future as in the past, and those who oppose such constitutional orders won't, just as they should never be. Why is this an overhaul then? My second observation after reading foreign media reports is that many of these reports proclaim that democracy is dying in Hong Kong. The changes violate Article 45 of the Basic Law, which talks about universal suffrage, and that this move marks the end of the one country, two principle. Hear that quite often, don't we? This BBC article, for instance, entitled China MPC, Beijing to Overhaul Hong Kong Electoral System, promotes the view that China's Communist Party had taken the biggest step so far to obliterate Hong Kong's freedoms and aspirations for greater democracy under the rule of law. Well, first, let's not forget the British wasn't really famous for bestowing Hong Kong freedoms and catering to their aspirations for greater democracy. And the comment was made by no other than Chris Patten, the last governor of Hong Kong. How ironic. As for the rest of the article, in true BBC style, all the analysts quoted in the report are critical of the changes, 4 against 0. And if you want to talk about the Basic Law, it actually says the ultimate aim is the selection of the chief executive by universal suffrage upon nomination by a broadly representative nominating committee in accordance with democratic procedures. According to the latest decision by the MPC, that aim has not changed. And let me show you, there is one more sentence which comes before that sentence, which these media never quote for you. It reads, "The method for selecting the chief executive shall be specified in the light of the actual situation in the Hong Kong SAR and in accordance with the principle of gradual and orderly progress." Please note the phrase, "in light of the actual situation in Hong Kong and in orderly and gradual progress." The same thing is true for the legislature. So when Ms. Patten talks about the rule of law, did he also mean this part of the law? Finally, I want to comment on this piece, which I think is quite neutral and could serve as some kind of a good example of how media can cover this controversial issue. The South China Morning Post published the article titled "Hong Kong Elections Reform, a Patriots-Only Game or Circuit Breaker Against Radicalization, the effect of Beijing's plans on the city's opposing camps." At least the report attempts to illustrate two sides of the debate. As for the analysts quoted, there is more of a mix of critical and neutral voices that provide a more nuanced look at why some feel the changes were necessary. For example, the article quotes a Hong Kong lawmaker who says Beijing did listen to reform ideas this time, including her idea, and that the changes reflect that Beijing no longer wished to waste time on uncertainties. A law professor based in Tianjin was also quoted as saying Beijing had little choice given the radicalization of Hong Kong's politics since the Occupy protests, which paralyzed parts of the city for 79 days in 2014, and that the central government can't sit idly by in the face of the opposition's attempts. All points that other reports do not include. Why? Why did the other stories are not able to give you this side of the argument. Anyway, we'll take a short break, and when we return, I'll talk to my guests about this topic. Stay with us.
See, I think violence can never be justified for any cause, which obviously includes democracy. Hey guys, it's Key Bros. So yeah, we're actually two final year law students at London. We're both around 20 odd years old, and we're born and bred in Hong Kong.
So the reason why we decided to start Key Bros was because we felt like Hong Kong was really in need of a civil and rational and impartial voice, because politics in Hong Kong was becoming extremely polarized a few months ago. And we also wanted to provide a platform for people from different countries, different backgrounds, who might hold different political views, to come onto our channel and share their opinions. I think protesting or free speech are rights which are protected under the Hong Kong Basic Law. But I think there are 2 points I want to make in relation to that. The first thing is there is no freedom or no rights which is absolute. So there are certain qualifications to the ways in which people exercise their rights. And for one, for example, if you exercise your right to free speech, you must exercise it in a way that doesn't affect other people's right to free speech. And what we saw in Hong Kong over the past few years was that the radicals and the violent protesters in Hong Kong basically intimidated those with whom they disagreed and forced them to submit and forced them to silence themselves. And we actually think that that is anti-democratic, and that is against the values that Hong Kong people hold dear to. Yeah, so speaking of the question of whether patriots should be the only legitimate rulers of Hong Kong, we think it actually depends on how you define patriots, right? So I think, again, we aren't exactly privy to the central government's definition of patriots or what it means to be patriotic. But I think one fundamental idea that we can all agree upon is that rulers or legislators or government officials of any given jurisdiction on planet Earth ought to embrace the constitution of that jurisdiction. And in Hong Kong, obviously, that constitution would be both the mainland Chinese constitution and the Hong Kong Basic Law. And obviously, because Article 1 of the Hong Kong Basic Law states that Hong Kong is an inalienable part of China, I think being a patriot at least entails that you should accept that Chinese sovereignty is in existence over Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is an inalienable part of China. And I think that's a rather basic requirement, because if you don't even swear to uphold that jurisdiction's constitution, then in a way, are you really qualified to govern that jurisdiction? Because if you don't agree with the constitution itself, then on what constitutional basis are you in power, right? Where does your power come from? It comes from the Basic Law. So I think that's one basic idea that we can all agree upon.
See, I think.
Welcome back to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin. I have with me for the discussion Ina Tungan, a former U.S. prosecutor, Ian Goodrum, senior editor and columnist from China Daily, and Ju Dan, my dear colleague based in Hong Kong. The warmest welcome to all of you to this segment. Let me go to Ju Dan first, because you're based in Hong Kong, and we're talking about the changes, as Beijing has said, that the changes are designed to form a new democratic electoral system suited to Hong Kong's realities and with Hong Kong characteristics. Help us understand exactly what are the realities in Hong Kong, and what does Hong Kong characteristics mean, according to your understanding?
Well, as we all know, that Hong Kong is under the one country, two systems policy. Hong Kong enjoys high degree of autonomy. But over the past years, I think the one country, two systems have been distorted almost beyond recognition. Yeah. And the central government has been extremely intolerant towards Hong Kong. You must know the Occupy Central in 2014 and the protests in 2019. People openly advocating Hong Kong independence using district council election platform in order to undermine the government or paralyze the government. They burn innocent people. Even me, my phone was grabbed and smashed to the floor because they think they can tell that I'm from Chinese mainland and I'm representing China. So all they want to do is use Hong Kong to go against China. So that becomes like a snowball. And for the central government, I mean, enough is enough. So I live in Hong Kong for 6 years. I mean, I feel safe before the 2019 protests or before the Occupy Central, but since those violent protests happened, so I didn't really feel safe. So I think originally Hong Kong did enjoy very much freedom and was ranked as the freest economy in the world under the one country, two systems. But now, so it is a time for the central government. They think that enough is enough. So they think they want to ensure this one country, two systems, the prosperity and the long-term prosperity of Hong Kong. So they make such kind of change and to actually keep the democracy in Hong Kong. I mean, in terms of democracy, there's something which is, this is not something which is universal. So for Hong Kong, as we all know, it's under one country, two systems. So Hong Kong enjoys freedom in every aspect. And I think, like I said, Hong Kong was ranked as the freest economy in the world. So Hong Kong needs a change right now. That's what I feel living in Hong Kong right now.
It's quite a complex situation, I understand, because on the one hand, you have a very free economy, and yet on the other hand, Hong Kong needs to understand that it's always politically, especially part of China. So how do you reconcile these two factors and make sure that whatever political activity you have or economic activity you have, it doesn't infringe, it doesn't go against the political basis that it's part of China. It needs to uphold the Constitution of China first and foremost, and of course the basic law of Hong Kong. Ian, let me go to you. Help us understand when we talk about the unique situation in Hong Kong in terms of democracy. What challenges are there, and what does this one country, two system pose as both opportunity and challenges for the election system in Hong Kong to be democratic, but also to make sure that Hong Kong will always remain part of China?
Well, it's important to remember that there's a big difference between opposition and sedition, right? You can oppose whatever the present government's policies are. You can disagree. You can have debate and discussion about what the pros and cons might be, but they have to take place on a foundation of understanding of, as you say, the one country aspect of the one country, two systems. There's been a greater emphasis on the two systems part of that phrase rather than the one country by some, and there are many who believe it should be two countries, two systems. And that is, of course, a red line that can't be crossed. It is a part of both the PRC Constitution and the Basic Law that Hong Kong is a special administrative region of China, and it's a part of China. This is the basic principle that must be upheld if any actual productive discussion is to take place. And there has not been a great deal of productive discussion in recent years. You know, people forget that there were electoral reforms proposed in 2005 and 2014 and 2015. And rather than come to the table and consult and negotiate and discuss, instead, these reforms were outright rejected. The same thing happened with the recent extradition bill, a fairly reasonable, mild piece of legislation that instead led to a paralyzation of all aspects of society and a total standstill. There is no room for this kind of democratic debate if you were going to walk away from the table like a spoiled, stubborn child, you know, that doesn't want to eat its vegetables, push themselves away from the table and walk away until they get to their dessert. Well, if you want to have progress, you have to be willing to take part in the process that leads to the progress. And there's been a very marked unwillingness to do that. So this has led to the situation we have now. There could have just been an extradition bill. Instead, we have this need to reform the system. That because it carries this to some people, anything associated with the mainland is tainted, and so they refuse to engage in any way. And that's not how democracy works. You want to uphold democracy, you should be upholding reasonable rational debate.
Yeah. Let's talk about the details of these changes, and I want to bring in my third guest, Aina, here from a different perspective. Aina, how do you understand, for instance, the expansion of the election committee from 1,200 to 1,500, with one more specific sectors included in the election committee, namely people who are from the deputies to the National People's Congress and members to the top political advisory body, the CPPCC, and other Hong Kong members of national organizations. Why the importance of that?
Well, quite frankly, what China has, the mainland has done was institute a system that has been working on the mainland. What they saw here was a group of subversives. I would have probably not used only patriots are allowed. I would have probably said subversives are not allowed. And, you know, your two previous guests have explained the situation both from an emotional and also from an intellectual view. But from the political view, you know, you have two systems. That was two economic systems. It's still one country, which is China, and that is mainland China. It's not something that can be changed because people have the erroneous idea promulgated by a education system that was not addressed properly in terms of teaching not only you know, the history of China, but also the language. I mean, right now, all of these people are unable to travel outside if they don't speak Mandarin. They're very, very limited in terms of their economic opportunities. So the central government has put in place what it believes is necessary. This is not something that's going to win plaudits from the international press countries. They know full well that there will be all sorts of damning statements, as you read out earlier. But the issue is what is necessary. Today, governments around the world, you see in Washington, D.C., which says that it has the best system, almost complete breakdown, both at the party level and at the national level. What we saw in Washington, D.C. was shocking. What we saw subsequently in Texas was incredible. The handling of the COVID-19 crisis, which has now led to many more variants being released and threatening the world, is seriously troubling. So right now, governance needs to be addressed in terms of what it does. Is it eliminating poverty? Is it providing economic opportunities, access to social services, things like this? So there shouldn't be this equating.
No. But again, to help us understand the changes that's being put out there, the expansion of the election committee and the expansion of the legislative council members from 70 to 90 as well. How do you understand the technical reasons behind that and the possible implications to address all of the problems you were talking about?
Well, the legal authority to change, to govern is granted to the NPC, which has passed rules that are promulgating what is going to be what they believe is going to be a more inclusive government. By increasing it to 1,500, they're putting in a representative democracy, people from all walks of life, not unlike this CPPCC. And this will allow people to have governments and make sure that the representatives are actually working on their behalf, not trying to create political revolution, but trying to govern Hong Kong.
What about the...
Well, I think the expansion...
Yeah, Judan, yes, please.
Yeah, for this question, I think the expansion will make it more representative. Well, the basic behind is equal participation of the society. Every sector will have some say in the election committee. Well, because we all know that Hong Kong needs to see the picture, how the whole China is moving. And you will have more members who know what's going on in China and make use of Hong Kong's advantages to work with Chinese mainland and not like going against China right now. So, and that certainly is not Hong Kong's future. So that's my understanding.
Mm-hmm. What about the new function, the new added function of the election committee to nominate candidates to the legislative council as well? This was not something that was done before, and yet it seems that they deem this necessary in the future. Ian, I want to pose this question to you. Your understanding of the need for greater, greater, let's say, scrutiny, let's say, of the kind of people that could be eligible to go into the Legislative Council.
Right. Well, it seems like it's just a more extensive vetting process that existed before. In previous times, we had some members of the Legislative Council, when taking their oaths, deliberately misspeak in ways that slander the mainland and slander China in general. And so there have been deliberate attempts to kind of thumb their nose at the idea that they are part of Chinese territory, that the city that they were chosen or elected to govern.
It seems okay, the signal is not very good. Let's try to get back to you in just
one takes to the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, the signal seems not to be very good. But let me ask this question, which is also on the lips of many critics in the West, talking about what Beijing believes is the best system of democracy that fits Hong Kong. They say Beijing's answer is that no democracy at all. It seems that they believe the election system changes will kill the spirit of democracy in Hong Kong. Exactly what are the criteria in their mind of what democracy really is? Aina.
Well, it seems to be just freedom of expression, but that only goes so far. I mean, right now, the irony is that in the United States, a Democratic legislator in Congress is suing Donald Trump and the rest of the people who incited the riot, using exactly this kind of anti-subversion laws that were passed after the Civil War. So in almost all cases, every country says you cannot be against the country and be part of its legitimate ruling apparatus. It's hypocritical to insist that somehow China should allow Hong Kong to, do whatever it wants under the mistaken belief that it can be independent. Anybody who believes that is, in essence, a subversive, a traitor to their country, and it just can't be allowed.
Judan, finally.
And to me,
yes, go ahead.
Yes,
I also wanted to ask you the interviews that you have done over the past few days. You've talked to quite many people. I believe you also talk to ordinary people all the time, not just for this time. And what are the feedbacks you have been getting as well?
Well, for the interviews that I had, and also myself, and also for those Hong Kong residents, what I want to say is, it is those riots, protesters who burned people in 2019 and who openly advocate Hong Kong independence, who really kill Hong Kong's democracy. It's not Beijing who will kill Hong Kong's democracy. And as we can see that after the national security law enacted last year, 2020. So we've seen this society has returned to order, and the business environment is getting better. So obviously it's not Beijing who kills the democracy. It is those people who advocate Hong Kong independence and those violent protests.
Well, I disagree with that characterization in the sense that democracy has not been killed. Remember that the system that's in place right now was given to it by the British, and they had a representative form of democracy. The chief executive was not chosen at large by the people. They were nominated by a special committee, and that's exactly what is happening now, only they're extending it to the legislators, a number of the legislators, to maintain stability so that you don't have the kind of chaos that you're referring to.
Ian, what is your take? Because my impression is that if you follow the Western liberal style, one person, one vote, then you are democracy. If you have any other ways, either a selection or consultation or consensus, you know, if it is not the Western style, then you're not a democracy. That is my impression.
Right. Well, I mean, let's be honest and understand that the Western standard of democracy is very flexible when it comes to countries or governments that are enacting the will of those Western countries when it comes to economics or politics. So the reality is that liberal Western style democracies are acceptable as long as you're adhering to what those Western countries want in terms of economic benefits. But also, yes, that's true. There's more than one type of democracy. Representing all sectors of society is an effective way to ensure stable and competent governance, right? That you're bringing in all segments that might not otherwise get representation in a simple one person, one vote democracy. You know, we've seen plenty of evidence of how distortions are very easy to do in a system like the one in the United States, where it's less about one person, one vote, and it's about $1 billion, 1 billion votes, so to speak. You know, it is democracy by wealth, and there are obviously very wealthy people in Hong Kong, but bringing in other sectors, labor, for example, bringing in a greater segment of greater representative sample of society is not a bad thing. And in fact, it can be a quite good thing as long as that mechanism is allowed to function normally, and that kind of transmission belt of people's interest turning into policy is able to flow smoothly, which it has not been. I mean, bringing up the invasion of the U.S. Capitol in January 6th can't help but also think about the fact that when the LegCo was broken into, what flag did those people put up? They put up the colonial flag. What do they want? I mean, do they want to return to that style of system? Do they want the British back? Do they want a colonial governor back? I have to conclude that might be what some of them want. And it seems like people have very short memories because that was not a very rosy time.
Let's take a look at a comment that we have collected from the social media. Let's put it up on the screen. And it says, well, when China is involved in Hong Kong elections, you know it be rigged. By Tony Tan. When China is involved in Hong Kong elections, you know it be rigged. I don't know what kind of, I don't know whether my guests can figure out what this kind of comment would mean.
I think his other name is Donald Trump. I mean, you know, this automatically assuming that somehow, you know, a nation's involvement, China's makes it questionable, is one of the major issues about the international press right now. On a daily basis, you have this drumbeat of negative press always castigating China as doing poor, as a terrible country, right? But what are the real facts? I mean, we've seen them. I mean, China is forging ahead. So
I think it's really interesting.
People like this are simply just pushing for the narrative, which is not true.
I think the underlying tone or the presumption is that China and Hong Kong are different entities, right? That China is not Hong Kong, Hong Kong is not China. So when China is involved in the election of Hong Kong, it's going to be rigged, whereas Hong Kong is part of China. So when Hong Kong, when the central government is doing something according to law to Hong Kong, it is not interfering in someone else's affairs. It is managing, it is governing its own territory. Judan, how do you look at this kind of assumption, whether knowingly or unknowingly, that somehow Beijing and Hong Kong are two separate entities on equal par?
Right.
Yeah, like you said, they all assume China and Hong Kong are two different entities. But as we all know that actually Hong Kong's future relies on being a responsible part of China. We all know that. But I think those Western people may have no idea about this. And honestly, I think we need, as media, we need to do more explanation on the details of those changes, because those changes actually do bring Hong Kong better to bring Hong Kong a better future in terms of democracy, actually, with the expanded committee and with the vetting system who can choose patriots, have the chance to govern Hong Kong. So we need to do more explanation on those details, right? And to make them understand more. I think that's what we can do.
I think that's the difficult challenge as well, because the changes of electoral system is a very technical matter. It needs a lot of patience to read between the lines and know the whole picture, and that's not what many ordinary people are ready to do, and that's what many media are helping people to do either. Ian, very quickly, you want to say something to wrap up?
Right. I think the presumption that anything involving China is tainted it does not just extend to certain people inside Hong Kong. It's a very common perception among people overseas. I mean, the fact that we're appearing on Chinese television media right now, there's a presumption there's a high-powered rifle aimed at my head right now, or there's a script I'm reading. It doesn't just limited to kind of these technical issues. It's limited to a very very emotional, it's very simplistic view, as you said. It's very easy to dismiss everything associated with China. It's much harder to dig into those details and figure out what's really going on. That's a more challenging task. And for many people, it's just much easier to create a kind of Manichaean black and white, good versus evil worldview. That's more comfortable for them. But it's our job to kind of lay out the facts as best we can, present them, and that's all we can do.
Absolutely. That's exactly what we've been trying to do. Thank you so much. Judan joining us from Hong Kong, Ian Goodrum, and Aina joining us here in Beijing. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. Thanks for watching. See you next week at the same time. You've got the point.
Dear guests, thank you so much.
Feel good. As always. Let's do some comments. Okay. How many people have watched that? Yeah. All right. Let me see. It's been a while. It's been a while that from Angeline J, over 3 million Hong Kong citizens signed and support national security law to protect Hong Kong citizens and restoring the orders of Hong Kong. Why the Western media didn't report? We know why. They don't like people to know that there are people who are actually supporting and in large number. Yeah. From Jai Achi Hiroki Honey, planet needs to realize that the U.S. economic theory is not only bankrupt fiscally, also morally, and lacks scruples, utterly ghastly. Okay. U.S. and U.K. wants to control China. That's why we have a Mr. Pompeo here. Somebody with a pseudonym that's Mr. Pompeo. That's funny. Oh, answering. I was former. I'm trying to find some rational comments to react to. Seditious education, no matter at what level, should be illegal. It's not very different from terrorist ISIS education by Danny Ferguson. Oh, quite some. Any questions directed to me? Anyway, every time we have such a live, it seems that people have a live discussion on their own already. We seem to have overseas Chinese representative from California, from Iris, in Chinese. He said, 我们会一直支持你加州华侨。非常感谢 Iris. Thank you so much. Panda Power says, long live the unity of the PRC and the Chinese nation. Yes. Okay. Any more comments? Well, if I need an email to the Beijing court system. Somebody wants from Dusty Bauer 2.0. Somebody needs an email to the Beijing court system. I don't really know what you mean. I suggest that you find maybe, I know there is a portal where you can access or court documents in China, but I don't know whether that is available in English. I don't know how easy it is to find that. Give it a try, maybe. Very nice TV show. Good to see you, Liu Xin, from Danny Ferguson. Thank you very much. Good to be back. It's been a few weeks that I was not here. All right. Well, I think we can call it a day. We can call it a show. Thank you very much once again for having watched us. If you have any questions, if any topics, do suggest, and keep following us. I'll see you next Friday, hopefully.